Yes, I can pray, chant, sing, and say affirmations, but nothing raptures my soul like being thrown into the wave of dance as my sacred meditation, as my own time alone with God. 10 years ago, sensual dance as a meditative and spiritual practice did not exist in mainstream media, particularly because in depth conversations about sexuality and sensuality among Black bodies were still being relegated to our sister circles and the academy. Reading from Uses of the Erotic, this paper was originally presented at the 4th Berkshire Conference on the History of Women, Mount Holyoke College, August 25th, literally just days away from now. And so how it literally brings tears to my eyes every time we get to this time of year, and just to see what conversations I find myself in and reflecting back on this work, and I'm very grateful to be in the space to talk with you all around this. But August 25th, 1978, and was later published as a chapter in Sister Outsider in 1984. So the footnote reads, as women, we have come to distrust that power which rises from our deepest and non-rational knowledge. We have been warned against it all of our lives by the male world, which values this depth of feeling enough to keep women around in order to exercise it in service of men, but which fears this same depth too much to examine the possibility of it within themselves. So women are maintained at a distant, inferior position to be psychically milked, much the same way ants maintain colonies of aphids to provide a life-giving substance for their masters. But the erotic offers a well of replenishing and provocative force to the woman who does not fear its revelation, nor succumb to the belief that sensation is enough. The erotic has been misnamed by men and used against women. It has been made into the confused, the trivial, the psychotic, the plasticized sensation. For this reason, we have often turned away from the exploration and consideration of the erotic as a source of power. Audre Lorde. The erotic, and yes, the erotic itself is spiritual. We don't have to subname it sensuality in order to see its innocence. The act of renaming is inherently white supremacist patriarchal ideology that wants to neatly commodify the raw energy of eroticism for bodies that make love, live, and breathe beyond the status quo. Fuck that. Erotic, sensual, spiritual are interchangeable terms with nuanced definitions. Footnote. I began to use the phrase in my work, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, because I wanted to have some language that would actually remind us continually of the interlocking systems of domination that define our reality, and not just to have one thing be like, gender is the important issue, race is the important issue. But for me, the use of that particular jargonistic phrase was a sort of shortcut way of saying all of these things are actually functioning simultaneously at all times in our lives. And that if I really want to understand what's happening to me right now, at this moment in my life, as a Black female of a certain age group, I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking through the lens of gender. I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking at how white people see me. To me, an important breakthrough I felt in my work and that of others was the call to use the term white supremacy over racist, because racism in and of itself did not really allow for discourse of colonization and decolonization. The recognition of the internalized racism within people of color, it was always, in a sense, keeping things at a level at which whiteness and white people remained at the center of the discussion. Bell Hooks, Cultural Criticism and Transformation Lecture at City College of New York. 10 years ago, sensual dance as a meditative practice and spiritual practice did not exist in mainstream media, particularly because in-depth conversations about sexuality and sensuality among Black bodies were still being relegated to our sister circles and the academy. It was a subculture of misfits who had been ostracized and traumatized by society and needed a space to find God in the midst of the music because our safe spaces were being snatched from us. We found it in house music. We found it in Vogue. We found it in street hip hop. We found it in transcendental dance. We found it in our juke parties and gigolo circles. We found it in movements of the Pan-African diaspora. We found it in all the places we were told to demonize, because these places were so far from the proximity to whiteness that they could not be deemed by white people and their allies as pure and sacred and celestial energy. And we know for some folks, the approval stamp of whiteness is so deeply ingrained in the psyche that they will rob, kill, murder, discredit, copy Black bodies, specifically Black bodies that are constantly seen as an endless source of nurturing and support and laughter and compassion for their ignorance in order to find that one leg up, to get ahead, to be seen as an expert in something that they ain't got no business touching. And others who want this same proximity will cling to their every word, even though they can see the rotting carcass and the shells of the work that have been ripped from bodies whose names will never be spoken in that space, whose work will never be acknowledged as inspiration or musing, whose work will never be seen in the mainstream light. These types of people are dangerous. They've adopted the mentality of white supremacy so much that they've become the whip cracker for every slave owner that will shoot them dead to get ahead in the race. When, not if, when it comes down to you versus them. Take heed. Sacred space is not a buzzword. Sacred space is not a commodity. Sacred space is how we have found the ability to do more than just survive, but thrive all these years. Sacred space is a necessity for bodies that have been marginalized and forgotten continuously in the conversation. For bodies that have had to withstand the tiredness of living in a world that refuses to remember our names. Chapter 3. Hella Black.